Hey there, future diplomats. If you're prepping for the UPSC, especially with international relations as your optional, you know it's a wild ride.
Oh, absolutely.
Trying to make sense of treaties and theories and just this whole crazy world out there.
Yeah.
But today,
Mm-hmm.
we're going deep on a thinker whose ideas, honestly, are practically built into how that world works.
Right.
Jeremy Bentham.
Big name.
Now
Yeah.
think of this deep dive as your cheat sheet
Okay.
to understanding how states work, how law works,
Right.
even why economics matters.
All the good stuff.
All stuff that,
Yeah.
will definitely pop up on that
You
exam.
got it.
So, I know Bentham might sound like ancient history,
He does. Kinda, yeah.
but
Yeah.
his ideas are surprisingly alive
Oh, they are.
in how, modern political systems actually function.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to unpack today, how his work is relevant for understanding the issues that we're facing now, today,
Exactly.
which is key for those international relations questions on the UPSC, right?
Absolutely. You
How
want
about
to be
you?
able to connect the dots.
Okay, so first things first.
hmm
Bentham had this idea
Okay.
of the modern state,
All right.
not just
Just any state.
your average kingdom or empire,
Yeah.
but something,
Something new.
yeah, something different, something new.
Something modern. What made it so different?
So different.
Well, what's fascinating is how Bentham
Yeah.
kind of blended this idea of individualism with a really strong centralized system.
Okay.
He believed that individuals had rights and they should pursue happiness.
Okay.
But he also saw the state as absolutely crucial for guaranteeing those very things.
Huh.
Yeah,
So it's not about the state being this big, scary entity, like
right.
crushing individual dreams.
Not at all.
It's more like,
Protector.
yeah, like a protector, making sure,
Make sure everyone's got a fair shot.
yeah, that everyone has a fair shot.
Exactly. That's a different take.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a pretty different take, especially
Especially when you think about,
when you think about international
Yeah.
relations.
Yeah,
where
where
it's all
or-
about,
it's all about power.
yeah, how much power states should have.
Right. Exactly.
So how did he envision this modern state working in practice? What were the nuts and bolts?
Well, he really believed in a legal system
Okay.
that was designed to, like, respect individual desires
Mhm.
and then a bureaucracy to support it all.
So a system that could actually handle
It could handle the complexity of all these,
competing
desires and interests.
Yeah.
It's this dynamic balance between individual autonomy
Okay.
and the need for order.
Right, because you can't have
You can't just have everyone doing their own thing.
you can't have complete chaos.
Exactly.
You need some
You need some structure, you need some rules.
right.
And for Bentham, that order, it's maintained by the state.
Right.
Think about it. Individual desires can sometimes clash, right?
Yeah.
So you need a system
You need a system to
to manage those conflicts
right.
peacefully and fairly.
Yeah, so it's like you have this tension between individual freedom,
Yeah.
but also
Yeah, but also the need for
Sure.
a functioning society
Totally.
where things can actually get done.
and this idea of a legal system built around individual desires that feels super relevant to international law, right?
Incredibly relevant. Like,
Oh.
how do you balance?
Yeah. How do you balance the desires of different states?
Exactly. And,
Yeah.
Bentham argued for representative democracy
Okay.
and universal adult franchise.
Like everyone gets a vote.
Everyone gets a vote
Okay.
as a way to ensure that the state truly serve the people.
Right. So it's not just
Or not just serving the elites.
or serving a small group.
Or a king.
Yeah, exactly.
It's about representing the will of the people.
Right.
Think of it as giving everyone a voice,
Mhm.
a stake in the system.
Yeah.
And that was his way of making society more stable, more just
Okay, so that's how it works internally.
within a state.
Yeah, but how do you apply that?
To the global stage, right.
Yeah, to a bunch of states interacting with each other.
Exactly. And that's where these ideas have huge implications
Okay.
for how we think about international organizations, cooperation, even conflict resolution, right?
Yeah, like the UN, the WTO, all these.
All these big players.
Yeah, trying to manage this.
This messy world of international relations.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got Bentham,
Mm-hmm.
all about the state protecting individuals.
Making sure everyone has a fair shot.
But here's where things get a little tricky.
Okay.
He wasn't a fan of natural rights.
Ah, the big debate
The idea
that we're born with certain rights just by existing,
right.
endowed by nature or by God.
Exactly.
The inherent rights.
He was more into legal rights.
Legal rights? Yeah.
Rights created and enforced by
You guessed it, the state.
the state. So why was that distinction?
So important to him.
Yeah.
Well, Bentham was a pragmatist.
Okay.
At his core,
Yeah.
he believed that rights were meaningless
Without
a system to actually guarantee them,
to protect them.
to enforce them.
Yeah, to make them real.
Exactly. And for him, that system was the state,
Right.
with its laws, its institutions, its power to enforce.
So it's not enough to just say, hey, I have the right to free speech.
Right. You need more than just words.
You need a state that actively says.
That says, yes, you do.
Yeah.
And here's how we'll protect that right.
And here's how we'll protect it.
It's not enough to just have it on paper.
It has to be real.
It has to be real, enforceable.
Okay, so how does this play out?
On the world stage.
Yeah, in international relations.
Well, this has massive implications right
Okay.
now. Huge. Think about the debate over universal human rights.
Okay, everyone's talking about human rights.
Everyone's talking about them. But are they truly universal if not all states
Recognize.
recognize and enforce them?
Right, because what happens if a state says,
Nope, not in my territory.
yeah, exactly.
What happens then?
Then what?
That's the question Bentham would raise, right?
Yeah,
He'd argue that without a global mechanism,
like a global.
like a global court, a global enforcer,
a global government.
a global something
Yeah,
to actually make those rights a reality,
to make them real.
they're just words on paper.
That's a pretty powerful point.
It is. It's a challenge.
It makes you think
It does.
about the effectiveness of international institutions,
Mhm.
like the ones we were talking about.
The UN, the international courts,
Yeah,
the different bodies that are trying to uphold these global norms.
and the challenges of enforcing human rights globally.
Absolutely.
It's like he's pushing us to think, okay, if these rights are so important, how do we make them real
Yeah.
in a world where,
In a world of competing states.
yeah, in a world of sovereign states?
With their own interests, their own agendas.
Exactly.
And that ties into his views on sovereignty itself.
Oh, interesting.
He recognized its limitations.
Okay.
He highlighted how things like
Like what?
morality, religion,
Okay.
federalism, written constitutions,
So all these factors.
all these factors play a role
Yeah.
in shaping how rights are defined and upheld
International.
on a global level.
So Bentham's giving us this framework.
Kind of a lens to look through.
Yeah, a lens to look through to understand
Davina.
not just how states work internally, but
Kind of also.
how they interact on a global stage.
Exactly.
And it's not just about power.
Not just raw power.
It's about,
It's about law, institutions, this constant push and pull.
between individual rights
Yeah.
and state authority.
It's a balancing act.
Yeah, it's like a constant balancing act.
Absolutely.
And for anyone prepping for the UPSC,
This stuff is gold.
this is gold. You got to understand this
You got to get it.
to really,
Really grasp
yeah, grasp those
complex dynamic.
of international relations.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about the state, individual rights,
The big picture.
yeah, and
Uh-huh.
law.
The foundations.
But here's where things get even more interesting.
Oh, buckle up.
Bentham wasn't solely focused
Okay.
on individual liberty in the traditional sense.
So there's a twist.
Yeah, there's a twist.
I like it.
He was obsessed with something else,
What's that?
happiness.
Happiness.
So how did that
fit in?
Yeah, how did that factor into his ideas about government?
Well, Bentham believed
Yeah.
that the ultimate goal of government,
The ultimate goal.
the big one,
Yeah.
was to maximize the happiness
Good.
of the greatest number of people.
The greatest good for the greatest number.
That's the essence of it.
Okay.
This concept is known as utilitarianism.
Utilitarianism. All right, write that down.
Write that down. It's going to come up.
Okay.
And it became incredibly influential.
So it wasn't just some wacky idea he had.
No, this had real impact.
Okay.
He argued that government should actually intervene, not just sit back and watch,
Get involved.
get involved, actively promote happiness,
Okay.
even if it meant
Even if it meant,
limiting some individual freedoms.
ooh, that's controversial.
It is. It's where things get tricky.
Yeah, because we were just talking about how he was all about protecting individual rights.
Right, but it's not absolute.
It's not black and white.
There's nuance here.
There's nuance.
This went against the hands-off approach
Whoa.
of classical liberalism, which was very dominant at the time.
So he was kind of a rebel,
in a way, yeah.
going against the grain.
Challenging the status quo.
So a government that actually cares about people's well-being
That's the idea.
That's a pretty radical departure
It is.
from the just leave everyone alone kind of approach.
That's the invisible hand.
Yeah, exactly.
Bentham saying, no, sometimes the government needs to step in.
To make sure people are happy.
Make sure people are happy, to ensure their well-being.
It almost sounds like a precursor to the modern welfare state.
You're on the right track.
It's interesting.
He was a strong advocate for social welfare programs.
Like what?
Education, public health initiatives,
All right.
even things like regulating the price of grain during shortages.
Whoa, that's getting pretty specific.
He was getting into the nitty-gritty.
So he wasn't afraid to, like, mess with the market?
He saw the limitations of the market.
Oh,
He saw where it could lead to suffering.
right.
And he believed the state had a role to play
In preventing that.
in ensuring people's basic needs were met.
This is huge for anyone thinking about international relations.
Absolutely.
Because it raises questions about,
About responsibility.
yeah, like, do states have a responsibility
To promote happiness.
beyond their own borders?
Exactly.
It's not just about taking care of your own citizens.
That's about global well-being,
It makes you think about things like
international development,
humanitarian aid.
the role of global institutions.
Yeah, like the UN and others.
In addressing issues like poverty.
Inequality.
It's a whole new way of thinking about
The role of the state.
the role of the state in the world,
Not just as a protector.
but as a promoter of well-being
Yeah, and not just for its own people.
for everyone.
This is a key takeaway. For
Absolutely.
UPSC aspirants,
You got it.
Bentham's ideas challenge us.
To think differently.
Yeah, to think differently about
About what the state is for.
what the state is for, what its purpose is.
What its role is in the world.
Not just about...
Not just about power and security.
Yeah, but about...
But about making people's lives better.
So Bentham was this fascinating mix of individual liberty, state power, and this real focus on happiness.
He was a complex thinker.
Yeah, he was ahead of his time in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
But how did that all play out in his economic thinking?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting.
Because he was a fan of Adam Smith, right?
Oh, yeah. He admired Adam Smith.
Free markets, free trade.
He saw the power of the market.
But he wasn't quite a hands-off kind of guy.
Not quite a laissez-faire purist.
So he saw a role for the state in the economy.
He did, and that's what we'll explore next.
That's right. He saw the value in free markets and free trade.
Yeah.
But he also recognized that pure laissez-faire economics, sometimes it just doesn't work.
It's not perfect.
Not perfect. There are limitations.
So he wasn't like a hardcore free market.
Not a hardcore evangelist. No.
Or like just let the market do its thing and everything will be fine.
Right. He was more pragmatic.
Okay, so he saw a role for the state.
He did.
In the economy.
Yeah. Getting involved sometimes when necessary.
Everything necessary?
To ensure fairness, prevent exploitation,
Okay.
and ultimately to promote the well-being of the greatest number of people. Remember, that's the
utilitarian principle.
That's the core of his thinking.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting, especially for someone writing back then, late 18th, early 19th century.
It was a different time.
Yeah.
Different economic ideas were floating around
So what were some examples?
of interventions that he actually supported. Get into the specifics.
All right, so he believed in regulating interest rates
Okay.
to protect borrowers from those predatory lenders.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
And he even advocated for a minimum wage
Oh, wow.
to make sure workers could earn a decent living.
Those are pretty progressive ideas.
They were ahead of their time.
Yeah, even for today.
Even for today, some people would argue.
It sounds like he was really grappling with this tension
Oh, absolutely.
between, individual economic freedom.
Yeah.
Let people do their thing.
Yeah, the freedom to work, to trade,
Right.
but also this need for social responsibility.
To make sure everyone has
Everyone has a fair shot.
a fair shot.
Yeah, that the system isn't rigged against them.
Okay, and I imagine this tension is still very much alive today.
Oh, it's everywhere.
And debates about
Globalization,
globalization.
inequality, the role of these big international institutions, like the World Bank, the IMF.
Trying to manage this global economy.
It's a complex system with a lot of moving parts.
So thinking about the UPSC,
Yeah. How does this connect?
how could someone tie this back to international relations?
Well, Bentham's ideas, they give us a really useful framework
Okay.
for analyzing things like trade agreements, development policies, those big questions about how countries interact economically.
Right.
He forces us to ask, are these systems actually promoting fairness and well-being?
Or are they just benefiting
The powerful,
Yeah.
the already wealthy countries, the corporations.
those with the most influence?
Exactly. It's about looking beyond the surface and
Yeah.
asking those tough questions.
Okay, so we've talked about his support for government intervention sometimes.
Yeah, when necessary.
But he also talked a lot about security.
Security was huge for Bentham.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
How did that fit in with his economic thinking?
Well, he saw security as the foundation of a thriving economy.
Interesting.
He argued that people wouldn't be motivated to work or invest or innovate.
They wouldn't take risks.
They wouldn't take risks. Right.
Unless they felt secure.
Secure in what sense?
Secure in their property,
Okay.
in their future.
Mm-hmm.
You know, knowing that the rules of the game wouldn't suddenly change.
Knowing that the system is stable.
Yeah, that their hard work wouldn't be for nothing.
That makes sense.
Right, if you're constantly worried about your safety or, having your possessions taken away.
You're not going to be focused on building a business.
No way you're going to be in survival mode.
Right, just trying to get by.
It's just trying to get by, exactly.
It's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Exactly.
You need that basic security.
That foundation.
Yeah, that foundation.
Before you can even think about.
Yeah, reaching your full potential.
Self-actualization, all that good stuff.
Okay, and this idea of security.
Yeah, how does it tie back to?
It ties back to his views on law.
Oh, absolutely.
And the role of the state.
Remember, he believed that the state was responsible for creating and enforcing laws.
Yeah.
To protect individual rights.
Right. And in the context of the economy, this meant protecting property rights, enforcing contracts.
Okay, so important for businesses to function.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And preventing things like fraud and theft.
Right. You need a level playing field.
You need rules.
Yeah.
You need someone to enforce them.
Okay, so for Bentham, the state wasn't just a referee.
Not just breaking up fights.
It wasn't passive.
No, it was actively involved.
In creating the condition.
For a fair and prosperous economy.
So the state has a role to play.
A very active role.
In shaping the economic landscape.
Exactly. It's about setting the stage.
This has huge implications.
Oh, yeah.
For how we think about international development and the role of these global institutions.
Like the World Bank, the IMF?
Yeah.
In promoting stability and growth.
So it's not just about, throwing money at problems.
No, you need more than that.
It's about creating the right environment.
The right institutions.
For sustainable development.
Exactly. It's about building systems.
Systems that work.
That support growth and fairness.
Okay, so that's a really important point.
It's a big one.
For anyone working in international development.
Or studying it, for that matter.
And this brings us to another key aspect of his economic thought.
Okay, lay it on me.
His understanding of this relationship between security.
We've talked about that.
Yeah.
Their foundation.
Abundance.
Subsistence.
Making sure everyone has the basics.
And equality.
The big one.
Okay, break that down.
All right, so Bentham saw these as 4 interconnected pillars of a prosperous society.
Okay.
They all work together.
All right.
Security, we've discussed, that's paramount.
The foundation.
The foundation, you got it.
Okay.
Abundance that refers to the creation of wealth and resources.
So like economic growth.
Economic growth, innovation, productivity, all that.
Okay.
Subsistence, making sure everyone has access to the basic necessities of life.
Food, shelter.
Food, shelter, healthcare. The essentials.
The things you need to survive.
Exactly, the things you need just to exist.
And then equality.
Right.
Now, equality is important.
Okay.
But Bentham believed it had to be balanced against the other 3.
So he wasn't a socialist?
Not in the sense of demanding absolute economic equality.
Okay.
He was a pragmatist, remember?
I'm a pragmatist.
He recognized that if you try to redistribute wealth too much,
Okay.
it could actually backfire.
How so?
What could disincentivize hard work and innovation?
People might think, why bother working hard if
the rewards are going to be taken away?
Yeah, someone else is just going to get the benefits.
Exactly. He was concerned that if you went too far in pursuing equality, you could actually undermine security and abundance.
Interesting.
And that would lead to a decline in overall well-being.
So it's like he was walking this tightrope.
Oh, yeah, a delicate balancing act.
Trying to find that sweet spot between promoting fairness, but also encouraging productivity.
You need both.
You need both for a healthy economy.
Absolutely, for a society to thrive.
And I'm guessing this tension between equality and economic growth.
It's still a major theme in debates about economic policy today.
All over the world.
Governments are constantly wrestling with this.
So Bentham's ideas are still relevant.
Oh, absolutely.
Even centuries later.
They offer valuable insights
into how to navigate
this complex terrain.
Yeah, this challenge of creating an economy.
That works for everyone.
That's fair. And that's productive.
That's the goal.
So thinking about the UPSC again.
Always got to bring it back to the exam.
How might this come up in the context of international relations?
Well, it's incredibly relevant to debates over trade policy, for example.
Okay.
Should countries prioritize free trade,
Even if it means...
even if it leads to job losses in certain sectors?
Right, because some people might benefit while others...
Might get left behind.
Yeah.
Or should they implement protectionist measures to safeguard domestic industries?
Okay.
Even if it means higher prices for consumers.
Right, so there's always trade-offs.
Always trade-offs.
And you have to weigh.
The costs and benefits.
Yeah, the potential winners and losers.
Exactly. These are real-world dilemmas.
That policymakers are dealing with.
Every single day.
All the time.
Trying to figure out what's the best course of action.
It's fascinating how Bentham's ideas from centuries ago
Can still shed light.
Yeah, they can help us understand these contemporary challenges.
He was wrestling with fundamental questions.
About human nature, about
how to create a society that was both prosperous and just.
Right.
And those questions are still relevant today.
As we're dealing with globalization,
Automation.
the growing gap.
Between the rich and the poor.
Yeah, all these huge global challenges.
It's a lot to grapple with.
Okay, so we've talked about security, abundance, subsistence, and equality.
The 4 pillars.
Yeah, the 4 pillars of a prosperous society, according to Bentham. Let's be honest.
Let's get real.
When most people think about economics,
Yeah.
they think about money.
Money.
Markets trade.
The nitty-gritty.
Yeah, the stuff you see on the news.
A stock market going up and down.
Exactly. So what were Bentham's views?
On those things.
Yeah. How did those fit into his overall economic thinking?
Well, he was a strong supporter of free markets.
Okay.
And free trade.
So he agreed with Adam Smith on that.
On that fundamental principle.
Okay.
He believed that allowing individuals to pursue their own economic interests would ultimately lead to the best outcome for society as a whole.
So the invisible hand guiding the market.
Exactly, that the market would kind of self-correct and find its equilibrium.
Okay.
But as we've discussed, he wasn't a dogmatic advocate for laissez-faire economics.
Right, he wasn't afraid to say,
hey, sometimes the government needs to step in.
when necessary.
To correct for market failures.
To address those imbalances.
Exactly, to make sure the system is actually working for everyone.
So what were some examples?
Of government intervention that he supported.
Yeah, give us some specifics.
Right, so one interesting example is his view on price controls.
Okay.
He actually argued for a ceiling on the price of grain during shortages to prevent price gouging.
To protect consumers.
Exactly, to make sure people could still afford basic necessities.
Even in times of crisis.
Even in times of crisis.
That's pretty radical.
It was a controversial idea.
Especially coming from someone who admired Adam Smith.
Right, you wouldn't expect a free market advocate
to be in favor of price controls.
But Bentham was always looking for the most practical solution.
The one that would maximize
happiness and well-being.
To the greatest number.
Exactly. He wasn't bound by ideology.
He was willing to think outside the box.
To consider all the options.
He also favored some degree of protection for small producers.
Right. He recognized that sometimes the little guy needs a helping hand.
To compete with those big corporations.
Exactly. To make sure the market is truly competitive.
And he even advocated for government action.
To control inflation.
So he wasn't afraid to tackle those big macroeconomic issues.
No, he saw a role for the state in managing the economy.
It sounds like he was really trying to find that middle ground.
That balance between the extremes of pure laissez-faire capitalism.
Just let the market run wild.
Right, and heavy-handed government control.
Where the state is dictating everything.
Exactly. He wanted a system.
That was dynamic.
But also fair.
And that's a valuable lesson, I think.
A timeless lesson.
For anyone grappling with these complex economic challenges.
Whether it's at the national level.
Or the international level.
There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
No magic bullet.
No, it requires careful analysis, a willingness to consider different perspectives.
And a commitment.
Finding what works best in a given situation.
So Bentham's giving us this framework.
A set of tools.
Yeah.
For thinking about economic policy, not just in terms of theoretical models.
Right, not just the abstract ideas.
But in terms of practical solutions.
For real-world problems.
Yeah, that's what he was all about.
Exactly, and that's what makes him so relevant for those studying international relations.
Because the global economy
is messy.
It's complex.
It's interconnected.
There are so many different factors at play.
And understanding the different levers
that states and institutions can use
to influence outcomes.
That's essential for anyone who wants to make a difference on the world stage.
So it's like he's giving us a toolkit.
A mental toolkit.
Yeah.
For analyzing the global economy.
For thinking about how to make it work.
For everyone.
And this brings us to another fascinating aspect of Bentham's thought.
All right, what's next?
His ideas about political reform.
Getting into the nitty-gritty of how to make government better.
So he wasn't just an armchair philosopher.
Yeah, he was a reformer at heart.
He wanted to actually change the system.
He wanted to see his ideas put into practice.
He wanted to make a real difference.
Absolutely, that was his driving force. He wasn't content to just analyze how things worked.
He wanted to design systems.
That would actually make government better.
More efficient.
More accountable.
To the people.
Exactly. He was all about putting power back in the hands of the people.
Okay, so let's dive into those big ideas.
For shaking things up.
For making government work better.
Yeah, for political reform.
What did he have in mind?
Well, for starters, he was a huge advocate for representative democracy.
Okay, that's not so radical.
Maybe not today, but back then it was pretty revolutionary.
So what made his vision of democracy unique?
He believed that giving people a real voice in their government was the best way to ensure the greatest happiness.
For the greatest number.
That's the utilitarian principle in action.
And he had some pretty specific ideas about how to make that happen.
Oh, yeah. He was all about the details.
Oh, lay it on me.
He laid out a lot of his proposals in his work, Constitutional Code.
So this was like his blueprint.
For a better system of government.
Okay. What were some of the highlights?
Well, he argued for things like universal suffrage.
Everyone gets to vote.
Exactly. No property qualifications, no restrictions based on gender or race.
Wow. That was radical for his time.
Way ahead of the curve.
What else?
Annual elections.
Annual elections every year.
Whoa. That's definitely not how most democracies work today. Nope. But Bentham believed it was essential for accountability.
I can imagine some politicians wouldn't be thrilled about that.
They'd have to be on their toes all the time.
No more coasting after you get elected?
Exactly. You'd have to constantly be proving yourself to the voters.
What was the thinking behind that?
Well, Bentham believed that frequent elections were key to keeping representatives truly accountable to the people.
So if politicians knew they had to answer to voters every single year, they'd be much more likely to act in the public's best interest.
That was the hope, at least.
It's interesting to think about how that might play out in today's world.
With our 24/7 news cycle.
And social media.
Yeah, everyone's got an opinion and they can share it instantly.
It's a whole different landscape.
It is, and it raises important questions about how to design democratic systems
that are truly responsive
to the needs and desires of the people.
Yeah, how do you make sure that government is actually listening?
In this age of information overload,
exactly,
it's a challenge.
So beyond elections, what were some of his other ideas for reforming government?
Well, he was a big believer in transparency and accountability.
Those are big themes we've been talking about.
They're central to his thinking.
How did he propose to make government more transparent?
He advocated for things like a public prosecutor. Competitive civil service examinations.
So making sure that people who work for the government
are qualified.
Yeah.
And that they're not just getting their jobs because of who they know.
So no more cronyism.
Exactly. It's about meritocracy.
Okay.
And he even proposed a system of central inspection.
What's that?
To make sure government officials were actually doing their jobs properly.
So like a watchdog?
Yeah, keeping an eye on things, making sure everything's running smoothly.
So he wasn't just about giving people the right to vote.
No, he wanted to make sure that the system actually worked.
That government actually functioned in the public interest.
That's the key.
And that feels incredibly relevant today.
Oh, absolutely.
With all the concerns about corruption.
Government overreach.
The erosion of trust in institutions.
Yeah, people are skeptical of authority.
And rightfully so sometimes.
Yeah, there's been a lot of abuses of power.
So Bentham's ideas provide a framework.
For thinking about.
Yeah, how to design institutions.
That are resistant to corruption.
That promote ethical behavior.
He believed that open government.
I love that phrase.
Open government.
It's SIPO.
Transparency, letting the public see what's happening.
Shining a light on how decisions are made.
Holding those in power accountable.
It makes you think of
but freedom of information law.
Whistleblower protection.
Role of a free press.
Yeah, all these mechanisms that are essential.
For a healthy democracy.
It's like he anticipated many of the challenges we're facing today.
He was a visionary in a lot of ways.
Okay, so he was big on open government, but he also had some radical ideas.
Oh, yeah.
About how to structure the government itself.
He wanted to abolish the monarchy.
The monarchy in England.
Yeah, he wasn't a fan of hereditary power.
So no more kings and queens.
He thought it was outdated and undemocratic.
What else?
He also wanted to get rid of the House of Lords.
The upper chamber of Parliament.
Yeah, he thought it was just a bunch of unelected elites.
Blocking the will of the people.
Exactly. He favored a unicameral legislature instead.
Just one legislative body.
More streamlined, more efficient.
And more directly accountable to the people.
That was the goal.
These are all crucial ideas for those of you studying political science and international relations.
Especially for the UPSC exam.
You got to understand these different forms of government.
The principles of democracy.
The challenges of good governance.
This is all essential knowledge for navigating the complexities of the global stage.
But even with his deep commitment